What's up? People are always asking me dumb questions about this front differential. And we got mine all apart right now to clean it. As you can see, it doesn't look that bad, but it has had water in it a couple times because the vent line got pulled off. So I'm just taking it apart to clean it out. I'm going to show you how it works. So the way it works is this little knob right here. If you turn this knob 90 degrees, you engage four-wheel drive. See how that shift fork is sliding, right? It goes from being here to being over here. That's the four-wheel drive engagement. That's when you press the first button. Now what that does is this collar right here gets slid from here to here. And when that happens, it connects some splines. Just like a little transmission thing, right? Two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive, two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive, two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive. Works awesome, really simple. Now there's another shift fork up here. That's because you go the first 90 degrees, it does that. But the second 90 degrees, you can see actually lifts that shift fork up. See how this is cut as a circle? Boom. Lifts up the shift fork. And when that shift fork gets lifted up, it's slotted into here. This is your locker piece. This slides through these three holes into 3 of 6 holes on the side gear. Now, as you can see, it's not perfectly lined up right now, and that's why your differential doesn't engage immediately, because it has to have that spin enough to lock in. So if you're stuck, obviously one wheel's going to be spinning, one wheel's not going to be spinning. It'll lock in really quickly. Now, you're probably wondering what turns this. This is the actuator. I've got it all opened up, just let it dry out, because it's a totally sealed unit separate from the differential. There's a seal right there, so any moisture that gets in your differential shouldn't get in here. And there's no breather on it. It's supposed to be a totally sealed unit. Well, if you look closely, that's a water droplet. So a little bit of water can get in here under some circumstances, right? When it's real hot and it gets cold and it pulls and all that kind of stuff happens. So I actually usually end up doing is I add a vent to this. It's kind of, some people do, some people think it's dumb, whatever, but it does help. I add a vent to this and run it up to the handlebars. And the reason for doing that is it lets the pressure in here equalize, and it'll keep it from pulling gear oil into it or pulling moisture into it. You don't have to do that, but if you water as much as I do, vents are great. It's one reason my portals don't work. But you can see a little water droplet down there. There's a little bit of moisture in here, but there's no corrosion. And it's just a big servo, right? So this worm gear turns this gear, which has some spring accumulator thing in it. So when you turn it, this actually holds pressure until the splines line up, and then it lets it engage four-wheel drive. Then you turn another 90 degrees, and those springs hold pressure until the 3 pins line up with the 6 holes, and 3 pins line up with 3 of the 6 holes, and then it engages the diff lock. It's a great system. It's really simple. It's just exactly how my Land Cruiser works in the front and rear diffs and most e-lockers and stuff. What's cool about it is that it does four-wheel drive and two-wheel drive with one thing. Yamaha, their front diff lock, it's actually pretty similar. They don't use a 3-pin thing. They actually use a splined coupler, so it engages a little faster, and I honestly think it's a little better. But the reason Honda does this 3-pin thing is because this isn't a standard front differential with with side gears and spider gears. It's actually a limited slip differential with cam and cam followers, so this is the best way to do it. I don't feel like pulling all these ring gear bolts to show you how that part of it works, because you have to tighten these really carefully and Loctite them, and I usually tack weld them back in, because once you take them out, they seem to want to rattle out. But I have another video that explains how the Honda front limited slip works, but pretty much irrelevant on this bike because it also has a locker, so who cares about limited slip when you have a locker. Notice that your diff lock actuator is getting a little slow or weak. It's probably because you smoked the motor a little bit. I'll show you what I mean by that. So look at the armature on this little guy. Little focus. Commutator's got some, armature looks good. Not a whole lot of black or anything on the burn insulation. But there's some pretty good black marks on the commutator. See that? Not good for power. That oxide layer is not good for conduction. Little brushes look fine. So little brushes. But yeah, plenty of meat left on the brushes. Pretty spring force. But this needs to be polished up. So you polish up those little surfaces right there where the brushes contact, and this motor will run like new. It's actually a pretty powerful little motor. Pretty good permanent magnets in there and everything. But if you do enough stupid stuff with your diff lock actuator, trying to engage it at speed or trying to engage it in a bind, or just abusing it with really big tires and there's some wear and stuff, you'll eventually hurt this little motor. So I'm going to go ahead and polish that up, and it'll be good as new. So to remove the motor, the wires actually have little connectors on the back of them, and those just pop out of these holes. It's pretty easy to do with a little pick. Just make sure you label which wire goes in which hole, and make sure you route them back the exact same way. If the wire gets caught underneath the motor funny or something, the motor won't sit in there straight and it'll cause problems. But yeah, the wires just slide out of the back, and there's a little focus. The little slot in there, they just pop into. Very, very easy to rebuild. And you just put the motor in a vise, grab the top of it with a pair of channel locks and vice grips, and just wiggle, 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 and get the plastic part out. You know, clean up the brushes, clean up the commutator, blow the dust out, and it's good to go for another 100,000. Before video, but before these gears were barely turning, and sometimes they weren't reaching their full travel. The motor sounded very unhealthy. It was bogging down, etc. Basically just cleaned everything and polished the commutator surface with 1000 grit sandpaper gently, tension the brush springs a little bit more, put it all back together, solder the motor back in, and check it out. So this 2-wheel drive, see how I went 90 degrees? All right, now you're in 4-wheel drive, and now let's do diff lock. Another 90 degrees. It's not really a complete 90 degrees, it's a little less than 90, but very healthy sounding. This thing is ready to do some diff locking, baby.